All right, welcome everybody. My name is Luis Giraldo, Chief Experience Officer here at ScalePad. And today I'm pleased to welcome a very special guest coming up from the Portland area, Mr. Dan Fox, who came over to ScalePad through our ControlMap acquisition. Welcome, Dan. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Luis.
So you, I would categorize as an expert, a subject matter expert, in fact, in the field of governance, compliance, and reporting. GRC is the common acronym for that. And I'm curious what got you into this? Like, how does one find themselves in this industry suddenly?
Yeah, absolutely. So it doesn't happen overnight. Probably like a lot of MSPs, I landed here out of necessity. Started in IT and found myself answering a lot of cybersecurity related questionnaires, working in the SaaS field, and just found the need to level up the security for the organization I was working with. At the time, the best way to do that was SOC 2. It was actually SSAE 16 at the time. It was the kind of the predecessor to SOC 2. And that required basically sitting in a room for hours and hours, coming up with policies, starting with some policy templates that you could dig up and buy and find. And these were the early days of cybersecurity compliance. And so that's how I got started. And I always thought there could be a better way. Like, this would be nice if there was some tool to manage this or some way to automate this. So that was always in the back of my mind, but I spent a decade doing it the hard way on using Word docs and spreadsheets.
I think that's a rite of passage for anybody in the IT industry, is doing it the hard way for at least a little while.
Yeah.
And did you, at which point do you decide, okay, I need to build a tool? And there's even a further pivot to that, which is, at which point do you decide, I want to help the industry do this in a more automated and scalable and easy way? Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first off, when you're starting off, you want to start with the best tools possible. And if there had been a ControlMap back when I started, I would have absolutely used it. I would have loved to have used it, but there wasn't one. And so doing it the hard way, it just takes a lot of hours and a lot of time. And now today, basically taking the learning that we have, working with cybersecurity compliance experts, we were able to compile a list of policy templates and the integrations and the tools to go on and basically automate these pieces. So seeing the journey the hard way is how we started. Pallav and myself, basically going through this process manually, saying, hey, there's got to be a better way here. And what kicks that off is just, honestly, it's the vendor due diligence process. A lot of folks asking your company for due diligence documents after you fill them out for the 100th time. You try to automate that process, but then you realize, no, there's a better way. If you can basically audit this, set a framework one time, then you can fulfill those questionnaires
very quickly,
hundreds of times over. So you do it once, you do it the right way, and then you can standardize. So probably the same process that MSPs follow when they're trying to standardize with a customer, so they can scale up and work with a lot of customers. Same sort of thing applies.
Well, and it certainly feels like MSPs are going through a bit of that journey now. And a lot of them perhaps get started with the vendor side of that. They want to have more due diligence with their vendors. I think they're being encouraged to do this, as some of the vendors in the industry occasionally have security, incidents or things like that. It sort of raises the bar each time. It's like, we need to ask more questions of our vendors. We need to make sure that they are complying with certain frameworks or things like that. So it certainly seems to start with the vendors in most cases.
It does. It starts up market is where it trickles down to everybody. So a great example is the financial industry. If you are a vendor of any type of, let's say a bank or any maybe financially regulated firm, FINRA, SEC as an example, those requirements are going to trickle down to every vendor that touches those customers several layers deep. And that ends up kind of spreading the requirements across everybody. The same thing is happening right now in the government space. So DoD is requiring CMMC compliance for all of their vendors. Now, that's going to be vendors of vendors as well. And that's already happening today. So even though the DoD is coming out soon with the requirement to take your assessment and then upload it to their portal and go through that formalized process. Already we're seeing the vendors requiring CMMC, some sort of CMMC attestation in the contract today because they see it coming. They're expecting it, they're anticipating it, and it just kicks off the process.
Well, it seems like everybody's been talking about the compliance wave, or this fact that it's coming and it's going to hit everybody. But I'll be honest, I don't see a lot of MSPs currently preparing for this necessarily in advance. It seems like the deadlines are what's triggering the action. FTC safeguards is a perfect example. I think a lot of businesses found themselves like, oh, we got a letter, we got to be compliant with these particular frameworks, and hey, you're my MSP, can you get this done? Mm-hmm. And suddenly there's the whole thing that unravels from there. But am I wrong, or perhaps it's a maturity conversation?
Yeah, so I think FTC is a great example of a requirement that is kind of a self-attestation process, not unlike HIPAA in that standpoint, where you are required to meet these framework controls, and you may even be signing off on them on contracts, but there isn't necessarily a body going back and performing checking. An audit. Exactly.
Well, is actually, it's the insurance company coming back to check when somebody wants to get paid.
That is 100% true. So when it comes time for doling out a check, as in the example of the DoD, they will withhold, ultimately paying you as a vendor if you did not meet those requirements. That changes the game quite a bit. Now you've moved from basically being able to sign off on something to actually having to prove that you've done it. So that's where things do change a little. But with FTC safeguards, there was a deadline in June, and FTC let everyone know for months leading up to that, hey, there's a deadline. And then when the deadline hit, they now sent letters out to everybody that they are aware of saying you are now required to be compliant with these controls. And that is what we're seeing triggering this wave all of a sudden. Basically, the controllers, the financial folks inside of organizations are now realizing, oh no, we are on the hook for cybersecurity controls that we heard about, but now I got a real official letter saying I better do them. And so that's where we're seeing action taking place.
Now, I had a look at these because I've been an MSP for years as well, and so I was naturally curious. What is the scope of some of these controls? And in my perhaps humble opinion, they weren't very demanding. I think they are similar to sort of IG1 in CIS in that they are kind of baseline controls that I think are very achievable for almost everybody. And so I think MSPs really shouldn't have any trouble, being able to check some of these boxes off. But it strikes me as where they get stuck is doing this obviously at scale, because if they focus in a vertical that is required to be compliant with FTC, suddenly they have to do this times 50 clients, times 100 clients, or 150 clients. And so tell me a little bit about the challenge that MSPs face in scaling, doing some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So just let's just say that you have 20 customers and 7 or 8 of them require some level of compliance. Just even tackling that for those 7 or 8. If you can start by making a repeatable process the first time, the following 5 or 6 that you have will become a lot faster, because you can take what you've done and replicate it over and over. Same as you do for managing all of your customers. You cannot do this 100% for your customer. You need the customer's buy-in. You need them to be engaged. I repeatedly say that cybersecurity is a team sport. It needs the whole company. It's a culture thing. And so this is something that all the way up to the CEO and the board, everyone needs to be engaged, and then down to the admin and the newest hire needs to be aware of.
I think perhaps the historical MO of the relationship MSPs have with their clients make it difficult for the client to take an active role there, I think, because, a lot of the relationship has been predicated on, yeah, you guys, we pay you to take care of this and just, make it happen. And so clearly there's a little bit of a mindset shift even for the end client to go through. Rob Bowles over at Blockworks has a great expression, which is clients have to participate in their own rescue. And I think this is especially true with GRC or any kind of compliance framework.
Yeah, absolutely. You want the customer involved. And it's an opportunity when you're performing an assessment, which is what we prescribe as the first step. You first roll out the framework, you perform an assessment, engage the customer along the way. It's perfectly okay for the MSP to answer as many technical controls as they can, and then maybe review them with the customer and make sure that everyone's on the same page. But there's likely going to be 30-40% of those controls that touch on other parts of the organization, such as HR or governance, or even at the executive level, how they make decisions, budgeting. Just engage the customer along the way. Say, hey, this is how I've answered this. What do you think? That will help a lot. And if the customer ends up saying, hey, you know what, this is a gap. We can't do this. This is something that we don't do today. That's okay. Mark it down. That becomes a to-do item, and you work on it next year. That's part of the process. No one is really 100% there, except for even maybe the Microsofts or the Salesforces of the world. But everyone's working on it. And the point is to start.
Yeah. There certainly seems to be sort of a raise the tide for all boats kind of approach to it. I think everybody is trying to get a little bit better at this compliance piece. And again, the compliance wave is driving a lot of the activity. I think there is standardization and some of the things that MSPs live by perhaps are a crutch in some of this, because maybe you approach this as like, oh, I want to deploy compliance or a framework for all my clients, and I want to do it with all of them. And suddenly it seems like a big hill to climb. And so what advice would you give to an MSP that hasn't done any of this to just get started? Like, what is the very first actionable step they could start taking?
Yeah, the first step that we always walk a customer through is setting up their own instance. Specifically for us, it's ControlMap, but we're setting up the instance for the MSP to roll out policies for themselves, to roll out their own kind of self-assessment. Where do they stand? Because that puts them in a better position to understand how it relates to their customers and move forward with helping the customer. They'll also find that they're going to level up their security posture along the way. There's going to be things there that will be identified that they didn't think of, that are just general best practices that you should consider doing. And if you're not doing them today, and maybe you need to make this a project in the future, that's okay. Make it a to-do item, but start there by making that initial kind of first assessment for yourself, and then work with your closest customer or the one that's asking for it or has the highest demand, whatever that is. Work with them next.
Sure. Now, you hear a lot about CMMC when we're talking about government, DoD. I think that's kind of the number one framework there. But I also, in the industry of the MSPs or IT in general, I see a lot of talk around CIS as kind of the preferred or favored framework. Is CIS sort of the place to start for an MSP sort of getting started? It
is becoming the chosen framework in the MSP community right now. It's taking the lead. I'm seeing more and more kind of push from industry leadership out there. Those being kind of the big industry players. They're sort of getting behind CIS, and primarily because it lays out a plan that's both prescriptive, it's easy to understand. Implementation Group 1 only has 50 some odd controls, so it's not that difficult to implement as far as when you compare it to, let's say, ISO 27001 or SOC 2 that are in the hundreds of controls. So it's a lot more digestible. And you also can choose, if you want to level up. So you can go from Implementation Group 1, and then you can maybe selectively choose some Implementation Group 2 and work your way up to Implementation Group 3, which honestly a lot less folks are doing because that's in the hundreds of controls again. So it becomes much more costly each time you level up there. But the estimated protection level is about 74% for just Implementation Group 1, and then moving up to Implementation Group 2 gets you about 80-something%. So you get a pretty good protection bang for your buck by rolling out CIS. And that, I think, is why the industry is getting behind it, because it's achievable, it's prescriptive, it tells you what to do, it's in plain language, it's understandable. So I think it makes sense.
Did you have a big, hairy, audacious goal to serve the industry with as you set out to get into this journey as a SaaS vendor?
I didn't, but I do now. I originally was just trying to solve the challenge of automating the honestly the cybersecurity journey for SOC 2 and ISO 27001. That was where this all began. And now we're finding ourselves working on primarily CIS, HIPAA, CMMC, just because that's where the industry demand is taking us. But they're all the same kind of approach, which is controls, control objectives, meeting those through, whether it be policies or technical controls, and, proceeding from there. So that is now, where we're at is helping as many MSPs as we can. We're now helping hundreds of MSPs. I believe that will be thousands over the coming year, and it's a pretty exciting journey to be on.
So you mentioned industry demand, and I think something that's nobody can avoid hearing about these days is automation. This has been a constant presence in the IT industry for years. AI certainly, and just innovation in general, or APIs and the ability to integrate into applications better. How are some of these technology, whether it's AI or APIs or any kind of innovation of this nature, reshaping GRC for that matter? What are some of the changes that we're going to see coming?
Yeah, some of the biggest changes are just redefining GRC for the small business, because what we're seeing happening is that the push from the top down with all of these cybersecurity frameworks is now touching more and more businesses. It started off with maybe mid-size and larger businesses that could afford to roll out very expensive GRC solutions and have the manpower to customize it and run it. But now this is pushed down to the small business. And so now what we're seeing the need is to make this as streamlined, as easy to manage as possible, so that the companies and the MSP tech professionals who are implementing can spend the time implementing the tech that they need to secure the organization and spend less time managing the compliance side. So that is really the key. Is I call it kind of bumper bowling for cybersecurity, or bumper bowling for compliance, getting the easiest way to kind of move forward and get that strike, so to speak, for the organization, and focus on securing the organization.
Now, perhaps unlike backup or unlike other technologies where sometimes quick wins are very self-evident in working with MSPs, I wanted to simply, see if there was something that came to mind in terms of an experience you had with an MSP or somebody that came through the platform and onboarded and was able to avoid a disaster or a compliance nightmare or some insurance, mishap by having this compliance process deployed in their MSP.
Well, one that comes to mind is a customer of ours that rolled out FTC safeguards and basically went out to kind of, in a way, put the cart before the horse. They went out to their customer base and said, hey, we're going to go ahead and roll out FTC safeguards. This is what it means. This is what it's all about. They saw the opportunity. They saw the deadline. They did not necessarily know how they were going to do it. They just put the word out that this is happening. And what happened was, on social media, it was shared a number of times, and they landed 10 new customers virtually overnight, within a couple of weeks, that were asking for it, saying, yes, I have a letter from the FTC, I need this, or, oh, I've heard about this, yes, it impacts my business, please come help me. And then they said, wow, now we need to figure out a way to work with this. So fortunately, they landed on us. They found our solution. And after they set themselves up with the first one, they were able to roll it out, a dozen more times very easily and quickly. And so that was a big win. I think that saved them a lot of time. They've been a big proponent of ours since. And good thing that we were able to find each other to work together.
That's awesome. I mean, I think you just reminded me with that story of how a lot of MSPs over the years have gone and tried to sell one of their new offerings before actually adopting it or even buying it from their vendor, just because, you don't want to put the cart before the horse. But But I think this is perhaps one of those, I guess they got lucky and they went and figured out they were able to do it. But what would you say to an MSP that's like, oh, I need to make sure that I can go get a client to buy this before I start, commit to the platform or jump in to do this? It feels like there's just a requirement to do that that's going to be necessary as an industry governance type of thing. What would you say?
Well, first of all, securing your own organization is never a bad idea, just to get started, to wrap your head around it, to show and demonstrate your own security posture, which we have a way to do through something called a trust portal. When you set this up, regardless if it's an audited framework like SOC 2, where you actually get a piece of paper from an auditor that says, hey, I've completed this audit, and you send that out to everybody. You can do that on something like CIS and just share that you stand here, and here's my security posture. So that's where you would start, is just get yourself in order, understand some of these frameworks, understand your own gaps, perform your own gap assessment. And then you have the tools with us to be able to do some of these on the sales side. Once you wrap your head around it, you're now in a position to sell it. But you're honestly not really in a position to be a thought leader or sell it until you see it and know what you're selling. And it's not that costly either. I mean, we're not talking about a commitment of tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, this is pretty low budget to get started. So most serious businesses recognize that, and it's a pretty easy first step.
I mean, sure, of course, and it's a long laundry list of things that still need to get done. At the average 7-person MSP, there's always a lot of stuff to tackle, and it seems like the reactive issues or dealing with the emergencies or the fires or the server mishaps and whatnot always take the priority. And it often takes the eye off the long-term ball of a project like this. And so it seems to me like a critical mind shift is required for MSPs to really adopt this. Hey, this is a long-term effort. We have to really commit to the process and the consistency of staying on it. And it's not easy for a lot of people to do. I think MSPs love the dopamine hit of the quick fixes and whether we like them or not, the printer tickets, that kind of stuff. And so I wonder if you've tapped into an emotional reaction that an MSP had that really got them to make that shift. And it's maybe a tricky question, but curious if you could enlighten one of those MSPs wondering if they can do it, if they can really get behind this long-term commitment or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really a question for yourself as a business. Is this going to be a priority for you as a business or not? And then the question would be, do you want to work with customers up market, or do you want to stay in the customer base that you're in if you are not requiring this? Most of the time, you're going to find yourself needing some sort of cybersecurity compliance solution somewhere along the journey. And you're going to have to answer the question, do I want to turn away that business or do I want to accept that business? Mm-hmm. And so I think that is where you would have that kind of emotional trigger, asking yourself that. I think one of the questions I get often asked is, what do I charge for this thing? Hey, just give me a flat rate. Right. What do I go and sell this to my customer for? That's that easy button again. Like, where's my easy button? The real answer is it depends on your customer and it depends on the level of effort. If you're looking at just a simple assessment, you might be able to set a flat price for that, which we end up seeing in the $1,000 to a couple $1,000 range as a flat price range, as a one-off. This is not as a recurring basis. You look at it more like the value that you're offering, the headcount that maybe you're replacing. How much level of effort would the customer do this on their own if they didn't have you to do it? And then you're able to leverage tools that help you automate it, which is where you can really have the most gain. So you don't have to count this as necessarily hours. And when I have that conversation with customers, the light bulb goes off. They go, oh, I see this now. Like, oh, okay, mm-hmm. I can go ahead and I can roll this out to 5-10 organizations, use some technology to help me automate this and help make them more secure along the way, and have a service to charge for. That's where things get really excited and excitable and interesting. So I think that's what I enjoy is when I see that light bulb going off for the MSP.
Now, you mentioned going up market, and I feel like this is, I guess, the natural transition of MSPs realizing their small business customers may push back too hard on an additional cost that seems to have no value to them currently. And they are not necessarily required to be doing that in the current state of affairs. And so they end up going up market because perhaps larger customers can't do business with other vendors or can't do business with their own customers unless they have some of these frameworks and compliance in place. And so I wonder if there is a lot of the issue is still sort of at the small business level, in that the hammer hasn't dropped, so to speak, yet, and therefore the MSPs can't really shift it. It reminds me of going from break fix to recurring managed services in a way. But what are your thoughts on that?
I would say the small businesses are just getting started with these requirements, and so again, I think you will run in the average MSP will run into a customer that needs some sort of cybersecurity compliance along the way, and this is going beyond industry. We're still sort of in the adoption phase of various industries and vendor due diligence requiring this, but we are seeing privacy requirements, governments engaging in, basically frameworks that are touching everybody, every small business. A great example is Australia. If you have revenue over $1 million, you have requirements that must be met. That's a data breach notification law that they implemented, along with their Essential 8. These are general frameworks that are best practices. And the great thing for an MSP is that it also says, hey, here's your gaps. Here's some technology we can utilize to secure you further. If you're going to opt out of them, let me just document it, make sure that we know this is a to-do item for next year. We'll budget it for next year. But it creates that conversation. It provides a way forward. So that to me is what's really excellent about this, having cybersecurity, kind of baked into the business conversation. And ideally, it marries very well with a QBR if you're having any kind of quarterly business reviews, or I think I saw Marnie mention quality business reviews is the new term.
I think, the reality is, again, the spectrum of size of MSP or maturity of MSP and size of business that you work with, to some extent dictates whether you can, roll out a consistent process on a quarterly basis. And so it's a way to get away from the specific requirement of doing them quarterly and gives you a little bit of flexibility. So I do like quality business reviews also, just because I think it places the emphasis back on focusing on the business outcomes. And cybersecurity compliance and frameworks of this kind, I think, are driving a lot of those business outcomes now too. In that businesses, I think, are more conscientious about the risks that are out there. I think people have been in denial for years. It's like, oh, I'm not a target, or that's not going to happen to me. And I think now everybody has literally 1 degree of separation from somebody else that has gone through some issue, or somebody's received an email from a vendor or customer or whoever that got breached, and now their money was, taken out of their bank. And so it's becoming way more real, and it's certainly driving a little bit of the conscientiousness around it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're at the point now where it went from a time when we heard about phishing emails impacting businesses to we know phishing emails are impacting everybody all the time, constantly. And so we're aware of them, we're training for them. And there was a time when security awareness training was something that was just, something you would maybe utilize if you were a mid-market or larger business. Now, guess what? It's standard regardless of the size of business. We're in that same adoption curve today for the cybersecurity compliance frameworks. And that's what we're seeing happening. We're in that adoption curve where it's, still, for some folks it's required, and others it's a good idea, but we're not far off from the point where it's required for everybody.
Now, I think adoption is another key term you mentioned, because I think a lot of the keys to successful adoption or rapid adoption is automation and integration. And I'm seeing a lot of the GRC platforms obviously focus on automating the collection of data, bringing reports and stuff from all the other tools out there. And I know we're doing some work in ControlMap to automate as much of that data collection as possible. Tell me a bit about some of the exciting sort of automated data collection that really simplifies that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, just being able to have a platform to manage all this in the first place, getting it off of spreadsheets and Word docs is huge. Having a place to collaborate with your customer, being able to delegate work out to 5, 6, 10, 20 individuals and manage it centrally is very helpful. So that's one piece of the automation, honestly. Another piece is integrations, where we integrate with platforms and we scan across them and perform compliance checks. So for instance, Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, for instance, will scan across and be able to show, basically what's compliant and what's not based on a framework that you have rolled out. And it's just nice to be able to see quickly, hey, let's look across and see where's MFA implemented and where isn't it? Where is encryption implemented? Where isn't it? Just being able to scan across that is very valuable. And then knowing that you have that as evidence to prove, hey, we have this in place or we don't, or let's go fix it.
And in many cases, some of these discoveries become project initiatives, revenue generating project initiatives for MSPs. And that's just one example. MFA is just one example, but there's, I imagine, dozens of these opportunities, across the board.
Yeah, I mean, scanning across, 50 different roles, absolutely. You're going to find plenty of project work. Even having the requirement of a vulnerability scan, most of these frameworks require some level of a vulnerability scan. That's another solution to layer into the stack that you say, okay, here is our security stack that we would like to prescribe for you because you fall under, let's say, FTC safeguards requirements, or your business falls under, let's say, CMMC, or even just a best practice like CIS.
I think one of the ways that MSPs can easily justify deploying a new initiative or jumping into a new platform or starting a new service offering is being able to say, yes, this helps us get more clients. So a question I have for you is, how can an MSP leverage GRC or compliance in general in the prospecting phase? Is it too early to really have, a platform involved at that level because you have to connect systems, you don't have access to stuff? Or is there sort of an in-between way of getting some visibility?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there is a number of ways. One way is saying, hey, we would like to, maybe perform a free assessment for you. And we've seen, actually, because there's a lot of value in assessing, and depending on how deep you want to go, you can spend 30 minutes on it. You can spend half a day on it. So you could maybe offer a free version, and then you can say, well, there's a paid version. It's only a couple $1,000s, and I'm going to deep dive and give you all your gaps. But what's great is you'll come out knowing where you stand, and you'll come out a more secure organization. And then what we're seeing happening is maybe some of the MSPs that maybe have a little bit more mature process will say, we'll go ahead and do the advanced assessment for you, and we're going to do that for free if you sign up for our service. Now, if you don't sign up for it, then we'll just charge you, whatever we agreed upon. Now you can see this crawl, walk, run approach. The foot in the door. Now you're all the way in, and now you've gained a high level of trust with that customer.
Yeah. And it certainly seems like, because network assessments have been around for a long time, but they have certainly shifted into this cybersecurity assessment or compliance assessment that now includes obviously some of the basic network stuff, but the mindset has shifted entirely, which I find fascinating. Wow, Dan, so much to uncover here in this stuff, because I think everybody understands the need to raise the tide where security is concerned, helping our clients get better, helping our vendors be more accountable to their security practices and such. So thanks for sharing a little bit of your knowledge here. There's more to learn. For everybody watching, if you are not starting your compliance journey yet, come check out some of the resources. I think you'll find it's a lot easier to get started than you think. And of course, taking on the challenge of becoming compliant internally and understanding how this works is going to help you so much more to deploy it for your clients and your own environments out there as well. So thanks again for joining, Dan. To everybody else, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.